Hey, what's up, guys? It's Reed Young for TransformProker.com. Been posting a lot lately on 2 plus 2 and answering a bunch of questions. And this is one of my favorite ones because I think, above all the other questions I've been seeing, this is one of the more common ones. So we're facing a pretty typical villain on the button. 100 big blinds effective. He min raises, and we have eights in the big blind. And more than having eights, we're trying to figure out what the range of hands is that we're going to be three betting here. And what ends up happening is a lot of people in not just pre-flop, but a lot of different spots in Hold'em look at their equity against their opponent's range and decide that that means it's a good enough hand to raise. And what they're not accounting for is post-flop possibilities and different ways that hands can play out. So just to give you guys a quick example, there are a few different hand types here that I think will do fine for our purposes for different examples. Pocket eights and ace 10 suited. So we're talking about choosing hands to three bet. A lot of that has to do with how many dominating hands are going to call us. So when we're facing a min raise, typically a lot of weaker kind of Broadway type hands like Jack 10 are going to be calling our re-raise, and that's because they have position, they get good pot odds pre-flop, assuming we don't make it anything crazy. And why would we? Because we don't want to make it, $12 here and risk, 11 more dollars to win the 350 in the pot. It's just not a good risk versus return. So typically people in the big blind are going to make it about 7 total. So $6 to win 350, that's a lot more attractive of a bet size. We'll get some folding equity, not as much, but we also get some wiggle room because our opponent's going to be calling us with a lot of hands. So that lets us three bet hands like King Jack offsuit, where we expect our opponent to be calling with Queen Jack and Jack 10. And you might compare that to a situation where an opponent raises larger preflop, which kind of forces us to re-raise to a larger size and gets a lot more folding equity, but it's more of a fit or fold situation, meaning that if our opponent is going to continue, he's basically stuck doing so with a pretty strong range of hands because so much money is already going into the pot. With this situation, we can have a wider range of hands. So you might be tempted to say, okay, well, eights are pretty good. I mean, a lot of people three bet hands like pocket nines when they're facing a 3 times the big blind button raise and they're in the big blind like that. It's not necessarily a bad play, but what you're relying on is your opponent 4-bet bluffing you a lot of the time, so you can then 5-bet all in and have enough folding equity that your equity when called, even though it's pretty likely to be bad because no one's really going to be 4-bet calling pocket sevens in the buttons position here for 100 big blinds. So the equity when called is going to be pretty bad, which means we need a lot more folding equity pre-flop. In other words, we just need the button to fold after 4-betting a higher percentage of the time. And if he's not doing that, then 3-betting eights right off the bat might be a mistake. So the two different outcomes that could give us trouble are that the button calls and we see a flop. Most of the time it's going to have at least one overcard on it. It's going to be like 80% of the time that we see an overcard. So the playability post-flop is not so great with pocket eights. And then we kind of covered if he 4-bets, we're going to have him fold, maybe 45 to 50% of the time in order to shove profitably if his 4-bet calling range is at all reasonable. So if he has something like 10s plus and ace-queen suited to 4-bet and call a shove, we don't have great equity against that range, and that's really going to hurt us the times that we are called. So he needs to fold for us to make up for that. So in contrast, let's talk about ace-10 suited or a hand like ace-jack offsuit. So when we're 3-betting those hands, we've already kind of covered that a lot of our opponent's decisions are going to be based on pot odds, and that means he's going to be calling us with a pretty wide range preflop, and that in turn means that we can be 3-betting hands that have a better chance of dominating a wider range of hands. Ace-10 suited is probably right on the cusp of ace-x hands that you would want to 3-bet. There's definitely times where I would be flatting it, especially the suited aces. They play a little bit better in single raise pots as they allow you to check call or check raise as a semi bluff a bit more frequently. So you can pick up some equity on the turn and continue bluffing, or you might be able to get to showdown a little bit more often with ace high. So there's a lot of possibilities like that that you just don't get as often with an offsuit ace 10. And conversely, you can kind of use it to randomize. So ace 10 suited is just going to be about a quarter of the combinations of ace 10, and you can just say like, okay, well, I'm 3-betting ace 10 a quarter of the time, and it just so happens that you're doing it with your best ace 10s. So that makes sense from both sides. If you're looking at a borderline hand to re-raise, you might not want to do it every time. So ace 10 has a lot more post-flop playability because it gets called by hands that are dominated by it. So like we said, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, all of those types of hands. Potentially some weaker ace x hands. And then we also have a lot easier of a time playing post-flop. We have a lot more equity on average when called. Say the board comes something like queen jack 4, or even queen 9-4. If our continuation bet is called with a hand like pocket eights, a lot of the time we only have 2 outs to improve. But with ace 10 suited, there's a lot of scare cards that might give us an open-ender or a gut shot as well on the turn, and we might improve to a better top pair hand than our opponent's most likely calling hands on the flop. So 3-betting hands like ace 10 suited, when we were choosing the next best hands to 3-bet, usually play a bit better post-flop and pre-flop. We could also 5-bet shove it, and we do block some of his calling range that dominates the hand. So it's less likely we're going to run into a hand like ace-king if we have an ace ourselves. So that means when called, we're going to have a little bit more equity than a hand like eights if we're against a tight range that is mostly ace-x hands and big pairs. So let me know how you guys are constructing your out-of-position re-raising ranges. If you have any questions, I'll be in the comment section. And if you guys do have a chance to click that like button, it only takes like half a second, and it really helps the channel grow. So I appreciate all of the support so far. You guys are awesome, and I will see you next time. Take care, guys.